I may be asking you to show your age just a little bit, and if that's the case, you can yell at me later. That's fine. But I'm wondering how many of you grew up watching, really it's a classic now, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Put them up high. Yeah, I love those chuckles. I love the laughs. I love the smiles. I didn't personally grow up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. My brother and my dad did more so than me. My dad used to use the phrase, would you be my neighbor all the time? Won't you be my neighbor? But I've got a great appreciation for Mr. Rogers, for what he stood for the person that he was, and the people that he impacted, as many of you who just raised your hands are evidence of. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do something a little different. Would you just kind of indulge me for a moment? Take a look at this video.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor? My neighbor? I'm glad we're together again.
That song has been stuck in my head all week, so I'm glad it's still going to be stuck in your heads now as well. I hope you didn't think it was a little creepy that I just stood here and stared at you, but I was intentional about that. I wanted to see how many of you had like ear-to-ear grins on your faces, and some still do. Not only that, a lot of you joined in and sang along. It's just a testament to the impact that this man had on so many people. A couple of years ago, here as a few of us on staff at the church, we went through a book together, this book entitled Redeeming Your Time. And this book, it's really on work, and it really revolutionized the way that I work, the way I think about work, and it's been a monumental book one of the monumental books I've read. The byline is 7 biblical principles for being purposeful, present, and wildly productive. Those are things I want. Many of you want the same things as well. And in this book, his final chapter is entitled Eliminate All Hurry. And that comes from Dallas Willard's famous quote, "You must ruthlessly eliminate all hurry from your life." But he kind of runs with that. And in his introduction to this chapter, he writes about Mr. Fred Rogers. I want you to catch the kind of person that he was, the kind of legacy that he has left behind. It says this: Fred Rogers lived a wildly productive life. Over the course of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood's 31 seasons, Rogers personally wrote 900 scripts, 200 songs, and 13 operas. Oh yeah, and he also starred in the program, produced it, directed it, performed the music, and animated the show's puppets. Outside the studio, Rogers somehow found time to write books, make speeches, travel, and raise a healthy family. In other words, Rogers was busy, and yet he was remarkably unhurried. As his biographer, Maxwell King, once explained to me, quote, Rogers did all this stuff, and yet everybody who ran into him reported the same thing, which is, when they got into Fred's presence, everything slowed down. So common was this experience that Rogers' staff had a name for it. They called it Fred time. King said, quote, whenever one sat down to talk with Rogers, urgency seemed to dissipate, and discussion proceeded at a measured, almost otherworldly pace. That otherworldly pace became a hallmark of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. At the beginning of each episode, the first thing viewers saw inside Mr. Rogers' home wasn't the show's host, but rather a blinking yellow light, a not so subtle cue that it was time to slow down and stop hurrying. Of course, this theme was carried throughout the entire show. Whether Rogers was speaking on camera, playing in the neighborhood of make-believe with King Friday the Puppet, or singing one of his trademark songs, just about every frame of the show seemed to say, slow down. Rogers' devout Christian faith has been well documented by his biographers and his former staff. One former neighborhood staffer and vice president of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary said of Rogers, I truly believe he was one of the most authentic and Christ-like people I have ever known in my life. If you were to make a list of Rogers' Christ-like qualities, it would certainly include his care for children, his love of outcasts, and his gentle spirit. But as we'll see in this chapter, as you would have seen if you read the whole chapter, this list should also include Fred time. Rogers' remarkable ability to be crazy productive without being hurried. Not only was this a hallmark of Fred Rogers' life, but it is also central to the picture the Gospels paint of our Savior. And he runs with that and talks about it for quite some time. But I have a theory. I have a theory as to why Fred Rogers was so productive, so busy, but not hurried. I have a theory as to why he was doing so much and able to do so much, yet be so present with people and leave a lasting impact that your smiles are evidence of still being an impact, a lasting legacy for all of us. Here's my theory. It's that he had a deep, devoted, dedicated love for the Lord that overflowed into a deep, beautiful, and Christ-like love for others. That his love for the Lord overflowed into every interaction and every conversation that he had. And friends, that's what our second central reminder is all about. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 22. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. Before we dive into it, let's just go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we love you. We're in awe of you. Help us to be more so in awe of you because of your word this morning. Lord, these people, your people, don't need to hear from me. They need to hear from you. So I pray that your word would speak with power and authority, and that, Lord, you would fill me to say what it is that you want said. Lord, I pray that you would be at work in all of our hearts. Take us from where we are and lead us to where we need to go for your honor, your glory, and our good. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 34, is where we're going to be picking up. Verse 34 through 40, I'm going to be primarily handling verses 39 and 40, but I'll start in 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, a Pharisee who was an expert in the law, a scribe who was an expert in the law, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Pastor Ben handled the first chunk of verses there. We're going to handle the last two primarily. But this is beautiful. This is an incredible command for us. If you're new to Christianity, new to coming to church, I know we have probably some visitors in town from out of town with Memorial Day weekend as well. If you're new to Christianity or us, like, we're glad you are here because you're going to get a glimpse at the heart of Christianity, of what we believe, who we are as followers of Jesus. You're going to see that on display. But this is so incredible. This is a beautiful passage. And I'm so glad that these are the things that Christ chose to bring forth. But you know what the issue is for so many of us? Yeah, they're beautiful and whatever, but they're familiar. Like, we've heard this. Many of you know this. Many of you could have recited this because it's so common and we talk about it so often. That's why it's a central reminder, right? But it's so familiar, and I felt that pressure this week. Can I just encourage you from the outset with the reality that if that's you and you're like, man, we just went through 1 John and love made known and love one another, I get it. Don't you have anything else to talk about? I could talk about a lot of things, but I won't. If that's you this morning and you're like, come on, another message on loving one another, can I just challenge you to remember that loving God and loving people are two of the most incredible and yet exciting things that we get to do as followers of Jesus? Amen's right. They're incredible things that we get to do, that we get to be a part of, loving God, gazing at His beauty, and allowing that to outflow into the people who are around us. Let's not lose sight of that. In fact, have you ever heard the phrase that this book is the only book where when you read it, it reads you? You ever heard that phrase? It's so true. This book is the only book where when you are reading it, it's actually reading you. This passage is so true with that. I've heard some pastors say that this passage is basically like an MRI. Like, it reads us. It tells us, here's where things are supposed to be. Here's kind of where things are if you take a deep look inside. It reads us like an MRI. If you're someone who deals with, let me throw two words out at you: complacency or apathy. If you're complacent where you are in your life, I'm okay with the way things are, it's fine, my life, my relationships with other people, my relationship with the Lord, it's good. If you're someone who deals with apathy, I don't care about my life, my relationship with the Lord, I'm just doing my thing, leave me alone. And yet you're claiming to be a follower of Jesus Christ, I would challenge you, come back to these commands. Because those two things, complacency and apathy, and loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself, those don't coexist. They don't. One drives out the other. Either your complacency and apathy will win the day, and that's how you will be, or you will seek to love the Lord your God, and you will seek to love your neighbor as yourself, and you will grow. And it's beautiful. So as we look at this, I would encourage you, imagine that it's an MRI. Imagine that it's reading you, and ask yourself, what is it saying about my heart and my life? Where do I measure up, and how do I need to grow as a result? It's an incredible passage. Matthew chapter 22, verse 39 is really where we're going to land for the majority of our time. This verse is what we're going to unpack. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Just like last week with the first commandment, Jesus is quoting the law. He's quoting the Old Testament. This comes from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which says this. Maybe. There we go. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So as we seek to understand this, as I sought to understand this week and unpack what is it that I've got to communicate with all of you, because I was feeling the pressure of this is familiar, right? A lot of people know this. But I was also feeling the pressure of, I had all of these questions coming to my mind. I'm like, I need to address this and this over here and this thing, this aspect of this verse. And what I started to realize was instead of just trying to weave all of this together somehow, we just need to ask these questions together. I had, I believe, a professor, maybe it was a pastor who told me at one point, I don't remember, the phrase he used was interrogate the text. Interrogate the passage in an attempt to figure out what is being communicated, what the writer, or in this case, the speaker, is communicating, the speaker being Jesus. So that's what I want to do with you this morning. We're going to interrogate the text together in order to see, okay, what are we to do? What does this mean? That's actually, out of the 3 questions that I hope to ask and answer with you, that's the first question. It's this: what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? What does this verse mean? The Hebrew word in Leviticus for love is ahav. Ahav. It's the same word that we saw last week in Deuteronomy 6, love the Lord your God. It's the same word, ahav. It's basically a general but yet active kind of a love. It's not a love that's going to sit back idle. It's a love that's going to act. When Jesus quotes this, he's speaking in Greek in the New Testament. And he talks, and he uses the word, you might be able to guess it if you've been around the church for a while, agapao, which is the root agape. The word agape in the Greek is a self-giving, it's a sacrificial kind of a love. It's a love that says, I'm going to look for the benefit of someone else, the well-being, the good of someone else, before looking out for just me, myself, and I. I'm going to look for the benefit and ultimate good of others. That's the kind of love Jesus is calling us to. That's what he's calling us to be about, to love other people, to seek their good, to seek their benefit, to seek their well-being, no matter the situation. A lot of scholars will actually argue that this is basically a rewording of what Jesus already communicated on the Sermon on the Mount when he said this, Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, the golden rule. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. It's a treat others how you want to be treated kind of a love. For this, here's that phrase again. For this is the law and the prophets. That phrase just keeps popping up. We saw it last week. We're seeing it this week. In our passage, verse 40, on these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. In other words, you could take the law and the message of the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, if you didn't know that. You could take the message and the commands of the law. You could take all of the messages that the prophets that God sent to God's people, you could take all of their messages and you could boil them down into these 2 commandments. Love God and love people. I thought of a couple examples of that. Anybody familiar with the book of Amos a little bit? Yeah, maybe read it in your Bible every now and then. Just kidding. The book of Amos is well known for Amos' message being basically a proclamation of judgment to the people of Israel. There's Judah and Israel at this point, 2 separate nations. And it's a message of judgment to Israel because of how they are treating others, because they are not loving others, loving their neighbors as themselves. They're taking advantage of each other. They're greedy. They're power hungry. They're not looking after the poor or anything like that. And so God says that's enough. Judgment is coming, and it did. I also thought about some of the very well-known commandments. You might know the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, I thought about those. Did you realize that you could categorize those, if you will, being the first 4 relate to loving God? Take a look at the screen. First 4 relate to loving God, and the final 6 relate to loving others. This is what Jesus is talking about. They fulfill, those 2 commandments fulfill the law and the prophets. If you sought to love God and love others, you'd be living this out. Actually, this is what Paul talks about. If you were to look at Romans chapter 13, starting in verse 8, this is what Paul talks about. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So what is Jesus after? To love your neighbor as yourself? It's a love that is giving, a love that is sacrificial, looking for the betterment and the ultimate good of others, even when it costs me something. That's what he's after. I'm so glad, even as we just talked about the Ten Commandments, I'm so glad that when this lawyer asked Jesus, what's the great commandment in the law? I'm so glad he didn't rip off the Ten Commandments right there. Those condemn me every time. All of us. But he summarized it. Love God, love people. As we talked about last week, that brings everybody. There's a place for everyone at that table. Love God, love people. Seek to live that out. Even still there, I fall short though. And if you're honest, you probably do as well. There are plenty of times where I have not loved God with all that I am, all that I have. Chosen my own way, my own strength, whatever it may be. There are plenty of times when I have chosen, whether knowingly or not knowingly, to not love. Whether or not you realize it, sometimes you people drive me nuts. I'm just kidding. Maybe. No, there are times when we choose, whether knowingly or not knowingly, to not love God, to not love others. I don't fulfill this perfectly, which is why I love the phrase, if you do these things, it fulfills the law and the prophets. Do you know why? Can I show you something else that Jesus said at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount? Matthew chapter 5, it says this, verse 17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them. Listen, I came to fulfill them. So what's Jesus saying? In other words, you take all these passages together, Jesus is saying, I came to do exactly what you could never do. I came to do what you couldn't live up to the law. You couldn't live up to the prophets. You couldn't live up to the messages and the standards that you were being held to. This is why Paul says that the law reveals sin, reveals where we've gone wrong. You couldn't do that, but Jesus says through my perfect life, through my sinless, perfect sacrifice, going to the cross on your behalf, living the perfect life, dying a perfect sacrificial death, and then rising triumphantly from the grave after 3 days. Because I, God in the flesh, did that, you can put your faith in me. You can put your trust in me. And then my fulfilling of the law can be attributed to you as you fulfilling the law and the prophets, and you can be justified, declared righteous, and not be looked at as your own sinful self who could never fulfill the law and the prophets. You can be looked at through the lens of me, of Jesus Christ and my righteousness, and you can be saved. The wrath of God can be satisfied on your behalf, and you can spend an eternity with me. Praise God. It's incredible what Jesus is talking about. It's not just this phrase that we want to skip over. No, he fulfilled the law and the prophets for us. When we couldn't live up to that standard, he did. In our place. If I could just throw a couple of passages at you now as we see the love of God poured out on us, right? Romans chapter 5, verse 8. He showed his love in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And so we see his love, ought to receive it as Jesus is commanding us to, and love others because of what he has done for us. Let me just throw a couple of passages at you. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14. For the love of Christ controls us. I love that. Like, I can't get away from it. It drives me. The love of Christ, maybe your translation says compels us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, and therefore all have died. And he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him, who for their sake died and was raised. you go to 1 John, I mentioned we went through 1 John not that long ago. 1 John chapter 4, verse 10. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son to be the propitiation. He sent his son to be the sacrifice that satisfied the wrath of God, the just wrath of God on our behalf. The propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. And then a few verses later, 1 John chapter 4, verse 19 says this, we love because he first loved us. He went to the cross when I could do nothing to earn it or deserve it. He showed his love, and that while I was a sinner, Christ died for me. And it's the love of Christ that I receive that compels me, or should, to love others. And I trust that we know, I hope we know that when he talks about neighbors, he's not just talking about the people who live 1, 2, 3 doors down. He's not just talking about the people in your neighborhood, on your street. If you were to look at the Greek, this word is actually just fellow people. It's fellow man, I think was the literal translation that I read, or one said like other humans. It's about as broad as you can get. In other words, wherever you are, if there are people around you, guess what? That's your neighbor who you're supposed to love. Wherever you are, whatever situation, whatever setting, if there are people around you, those are the ones you're to go to. Those are the ones you are to treat as you would want to be treated. Those are the ones you are to love, to sacrifice, to sacrifice for, to give of yourself for their ultimate good. Because that's exactly what Christ did for us. Whether it's your spouse in the home, whether it's kids, whether you're in a classroom. I know school's getting ready to wrap up here in some public schools, but whether you're in the grocery store or coworkers, whether you're in church, whether you are on the pickleball court, because all of a sudden that came out of nowhere and is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I get really annoyed at that game. It tests my sanctification a little bit. Wherever you are, seek to love. Seek the ultimate good well-being of the people who are around you. So if we could go to our next question, it really leads to it. I think it begs the question, how do we do it? How do we love our neighbors as ourselves? How do we seek to love in a way that puts Christ on display, seeks their ultimate good as he sought ours? How do we do it? If we could step aside from Matthew 22 for a moment, we'll come back to it. But what I want to do is step aside from Matthew 22, and I just want to share some really biblical and practical principles and just options for how we can love one another. The first thing I would say to you is this: build relationships. Build relationships with the people who are around you. Do not discount, don't underestimate the power of a relationship built, particularly when it comes to sharing the gospel with someone who needs it, who doesn't know Jesus. Seek to build relationships with the people who are around you. And the second thing that I would tell you actually is very connected with this. I would say practice hospitality. Practice hospitality. I did some reading on this, was doing some studying. Did you know that there are 50 occurrences in the Gospel of Luke where food is referenced? 50 in the Gospel of Luke where food is referenced. In fact, Robert Karras, who is a Luke scholar, he had this to say. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. I don't know about you, but I like this Jesus. That resonates with me, right? He's either going or he's at or coming from. If I read another book where John Mark Comer kind of put all of these thoughts together. He had some other quotes that he was working off of, and he put them all together. Look at what it says. The UK pastor, Tim Chester, wrote a great little book called A Meal with Jesus, where he pointed out there's an iconic verbal formula that's used 2 times in Luke. The Son of Man came. First, Luke wrote, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That was what Jesus did, his mission. Then he wrote, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. That, Luke 7:34, was how Jesus did it, his method. I love that. There is something about eating together, something about hospitality that breaks down walls and shows people you are loved. You have my undivided time and attention right now. There's something about it that just goes to show people that you love in a way that Christ loved. Especially, again, as it relates to sharing the gospel. Do not underestimate the power that a relationship can have when you share the gospel with someone who needs it, who doesn't know it. So in the summertime, as we're here now, have a campfire. Invite a couple of people to sit around a bonfire with you. Go out to eat with someone. Have someone come to your house and eat. Have a game night. I don't care. Get creative. There's lots of ways to invite people in to intentionally, whether you tell them or not, intentionally love on them. That's the second thing. I've got to move on. Number 3, extend forgiveness. Extend forgiveness. That can be a hard thing to do, but I would argue it is a loving thing to do, Christ-like thing to do. If you were to look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, my wife showed me a song. I'm not going to sing it for you, but it's stuck in my head constantly. Be kind to one another. Anyways, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. What about those who are hard to love? Anybody in your life, anybody really honest and say, yeah, I got some people in my life who drive me nuts, and they're really hard to love? One guy, thank you. Thank you. I was going to say, I'm the only horrible person here? Come on. There are people who are hard to love, absolutely. What did Jesus say in Matthew? On the Sermon on the Mount again, Matthew 5:34, you have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. We've talked about this pretty frequently here, that when you find someone in your life is hard to love, pray for them. Consistently pray for them, and it will be amazing the kind of transformation in your heart that takes place, in your mind, your perspective toward them. Extend forgiveness. Next, I would tell you to confront sin. Your own before others, right? Graciously speaking the truth in love, making sure that I'm yanking the log out of my own eye before I point out the speck in someone else's. But sometimes one of the most loving things that you can do for someone is have a frank conversation about sin in love. Good friends say hard things. Confront sin, and then I would say finally, this is not an exhaustive list. There's more you could add, but I would say finally, share the gospel. Most loving thing you could do for someone who doesn't know Jesus, period. Share the gospel with them. Give them the good news of Jesus Christ. They are looking at an eternity apart from Him in a very real place called hell. They need Jesus. He is, in fact, the only hope. To summarize a lot of what we've talked about already, I couldn't help but think of Paul's words in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. It says this, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. I would challenge you, ask yourself, how can I love the people in my life? people around me? How can I serve? How can I use the gifts and abilities that God has given to me to love others? As a church, we have 3 values. We've talked about this pretty frequently, but we have 3 values. We value God's word, we value worship, but we also value others. We value others, and therefore we seek to model the fruit of the Spirit. We seek to behold the beauty of Jesus. You know the phrase, you become what you behold. We seek to look at the beauty of Christ, allow for Him to transform our hearts, our minds, our lives, and then live like Him, representing Him in the world that so desperately needs Him. We seek to model the fruit of the Spirit. With all that said, I've got one final question for you that hopefully we can ask and answer together. One final question. It's this: why don't we love? Why don't we love our neighbor as ourselves? Here's the reality. Some of you are killing it at this, and I get that. I don't want to forget or neglect the work that many of you put in to intentionally love on other people. I know you do a great job. But some of you, I wonder if anybody's seen that commercial where the football players, they're eating little gummy bears on the sideline. They're supposedly football players. I think they'd be kicked off the team pretty quickly, especially if I was coach. But they're talking in like high-pitched kid voices, and these gummy bears are just so good that they're not going to get off the sidelines and get into the game. Is that you when it comes to loving God and loving other people? I'm good where I am. These gummy bears are just too good. I get it. I love gummy bears. Side note. If so, why are you there? And why are you not in the game? Why not? I think there are all kinds of reasons that we can give as to why we wouldn't want to love others, why it's hard for us. I think they're excuses, but maybe it's our pride that gets in the way, the image that we want to project, present of ourselves. Maybe it's insecurity. I don't know, I'm not secure in who I am, not secure in who I am as a follower of Jesus. Maybe it's fear. I don't know what to say. I won't know what to say, and I'm just awkward and won't know how to love on people. I get all that. But I think the more I thought about that, the more I began to think that those are the byproduct of a greater issue. That those are symptoms of a greater issue. Look at Matthew chapter 22 again with me one more time, verse 37. And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, all that you are. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it." Second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. That word "like" in the Greek, that word is actually an elevating word. It's used to basically say this is the same in importance, which is really interesting considering he's talking to Pharisees who, as we talked about last week, with the 613 different laws in the Old Testament, they said, this one's up here, this one's down here. They tried to elevate some and not elevate others. So Jesus is saying, no, these are both elevated, which is important. He also says, on both of these depend all the law and the prophets. Do you know what I think Jesus is doing? I think in some way he's saying these two are inseparable. Listen, it is impossible to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and yet not love your neighbor. As we talked about, as we gaze at the beauty of Christ, we see his love flowing to us over time. We begin to look like him, live like him, and as his love flows to us, it should flow through us. It's an evidence, if you will, of genuine love for the Lord your God. But the same is true the other way. It is impossible to love your neighbor as yourself as selflessly as Jesus is calling for here, but yet not love the Lord your God with everything you are. You can't do it in your own strength. We are dependent on his love. I heard a pastor say it like this: loving him first is loving others best. We're dependent on his love, his strength. This is why we talk about the importance of abiding in him and being in his presence. So if you are an individual who would say, I'm struggling to love others, I'm not loving others, I'm not loving my neighbor, or I'm choosing not to repeatedly, consistently, it's becoming a posture of my heart that I'm not loving. My question for you is not, well, why aren't you loving others? My question is deeper, and it's, okay, so how's your love for the Lord? Because it goes back to that. They're connected. They're inseparable. Are you in his word? Are you spending time with him? Are you seeking to abide in him? Are you seeking to sit and listen for the still, quiet, small voice? Are you just doing your own thing? I think all of those things, the pride, the insecurity, the fear, I think it all stems from, well, where's my relationship with the Lord really at? And if this passage, like we said at the beginning, if this passage is an MRI and it's reading the deeper parts of our hearts and our souls, where are you at? Where are you? How's your love for God? How's your love for the people you come in contact with? You apathetic? Complacent? Or are you seeking to love him with all that you are and in turn love others? Where do you need to grow in your love for the people who are around you? Who do you need to seek to intentionally love? Who in your life is hard to love? Does your lack of love for the people who are around you point to maybe a deeper heart issue? That maybe I'm holding back from loving the Lord in some way. And if so, why? I don't know about you. I want to be like Mr. Rogers when I grow up. Anybody else with me? I want to be like him. I want my work to matter, to impact people, to build the church for the glory of Christ. But I also want to be so present that things just feel like they slow down. That people feel like I actually love them, that the love of Christ seems as though it is flowing directly through me. I want to love God and love people like that. What about you? Where are you at in all this? Where's your heart? Where's your love for the Lord? I would encourage you, I'll leave you with Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love. Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Walk in love as you go from this place. You go to the grocery store. Actually, it's funny, I think I'm supposed to be on the pickleball court later. I'm on the court. Walk in love. Seek to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. Seek to love your neighbor as yourself, to look for their good, eternal benefit, well-being, even when it costs you something. Father, we come before you and thank you for your word. Lord, I pray that you would just be at work in our hearts as we go from this place. Help us to love you deeper, love others in a way that puts Christ on display. Lord, help us to be imitators of you. Father, as I stand here and think about those who don't know you personally, don't have a relationship with Christ, Lord, their next step, their greatest need, seeking their good eternally, is a relationship with you. So, Lord, would you pierce their hearts? Help them to see that they can't live up to this without you. It's your strength and your love that compels us, that controls us. So God, just be at work in this place as we go throughout the week. Lord, bring these things to our minds. Help us to be intentional, to love the people who are around us, because we recognize that that is exactly what Christ did for us, that he went to a cross for us. We love you. We praise you. Lord, we thank you for all that you are and all that you do. And it's in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.